They say every family has secrets, things that hide behind smiles, laughter, and neatly framed photos. If you walked past our house on a Sunday morning, you'd probably think we were the perfect family. A big white house with flowers by the porch, 2 kids running around in the yard, and a husband reading the newspaper with a cup of tea. From the outside, it looked beautiful. But inside, it was slowly falling apart. I used to wake up before everyone else. The smell of breakfast, the clatter of plates, the soft hum of the washing machine. That was my music. It was the rhythm of my life for 20 years. I was the kind of wife who made sure everyone had clean clothes, packed lunches, and a home that felt warm. But somewhere in that routine, I forgot what it felt like to be me when I married him. I was only 24, young, hopeful, and madly in love. He was charming, intelligent, ambitious. He made me laugh so easily back then. He'd hold my hand in public, whisper promises in my ear, and look at me like I was his entire world. But love changes with time. At first, it fades softly, like a candle flickering in the wind, and then one day, it just goes out completely. I didn't notice it at first. Maybe I didn't want to, but I started feeling it in the small things. In the way he stopped saying good morning, in the way dinner became silent, in how his eyes looked past me, not at me. There were moments when I would look at him and wonder, when did we stop being us? I remember one evening very clearly. It was raining, the kind of heavy rain that fills the whole house with the sound of water hitting the windows. He came home late, again. His shirt was soaked, his face tired. I rushed to get him a towel, like I always did, and he just brushed past me. No smile, no thank you. He went straight to the study, shut the door, and I stood there, towel in hand, feeling invisible. That was the night I realized I hadn't been hugged in weeks, not because of a fight, not because of anger, but because he simply didn't see me anymore. People always talk about heartbreak like it happens in one moment, a loud, painful explosion, but mine wasn't like that. It was quiet. It was in the 1,000 small moments of being ignored. It was in the slow realization that I was living beside him, not with him. I started spending more time alone, in the kitchen, or in our small garden at the back. I would water the plants even when they didn't need it, just to keep myself busy. Sometimes I'd sit there in silence, staring at the flowers, wondering when my marriage turned into a habit instead of love. Our children were young back then. They kept me going. They thought everything was fine. I made sure they did. I smiled when I served dinner, laughed at their stories, and made up excuses for their father's absence. I told them, Papa's working hard for us, even when I knew he wasn't working late. He was just somewhere else. You see, pretending becomes a skill when your heart is breaking. Slowly, you learn how to smile without meaning it, how to talk without feeling, how to live without truly living. There were times I thought about confronting him, but what would I say? How do you ask your husband if he still loves you without sounding desperate? So I stayed quiet because silence felt safer than rejection. Our wedding photos still hung on the wall in the living room. I used to look at them. Sometimes when he wasn't home, the way we smiled at each other that day, it almost looked like a different life. A different version of us, a version that believed in forever. But forever is a strange word. It sounds beautiful when you're young, but it becomes heavy when you're tired. I started writing in my journal again after years, not because I had time, but because I needed somewhere to speak. On paper, I could be honest. I could write what I couldn't say out loud. I feel lonely. I miss the man I married. I don't know who I am anymore. Sometimes I'd read old entries from the early days of our marriage. The words were full of hope. Dreams about traveling, building a family, growing old together. Now, when I compared those pages to my new ones, the difference was like light and shadow. It's strange how love can disappear without a goodbye. No fights, no betrayal, no tragedy, just distance. A slow, silent distance that grows wider every day until one morning you realize you're married to a stranger. One night after everyone was asleep, I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her hair was graying, her eyes tired, her smile gone. I touched my reflection gently and whispered, "Where did you go?" That was the first time I cried in years, not because he hurt me, but because I realized I had lost myself. I think that's the cruelest part of love. You give so much of yourself trying to keep someone else happy that one day you wake up and realize there's nothing left of you. The next morning, everything looked the same. The kids laughing, breakfast cooking, the sound of his car leaving for work. But something inside me had changed. For the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel like pretending. I didn't feel like being the perfect wife anymore. I wasn't ready to leave yet. No. But somewhere deep down, I knew the day would come. The day I would finally stop waiting for him to notice me. The day I would stop trying to fix something that was already gone. For now, I just kept living, quietly, carefully, and unnoticed, in a house full of memories that no longer felt like home. And as I stood by the window that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red, I realized something simple, yet painful. Sometimes the saddest part about love ending is that it doesn't end all at once. It just fades, slowly, until all that's left is silence. I wish I could tell you that the first few years of our marriage were a fairy tale. But the truth is, they were more like a slow rain that never stopped, soft at first, but enough to make everything around us damp and heavy. We had our moments, of course. Those evenings when he'd bring me flowers, or when we'd sit on the rooftop after dinner, talking about dreams we'd never truly chased. But in between those little moments of warmth, there were arguments, tiny ones that slowly grew sharper. He was a quiet man, the kind who believed silence could fix everything. I, on the other hand, was always the one talking, hoping words could heal the distance between us. But silence always won. In the early years, I thought his silence meant strength, that he was a man who just didn't like to argue. But over time, I realized silence can also mean withdrawal. It can mean a wall being built, brick by brick, while you're too busy hoping it's just a phase. There were nights when I'd stay up waiting for him. He'd say he was busy at work or that a friend needed him. And I believed him, because trust was something I wore like a second skin. But then came the nights when even trust started to itch, when I'd hear the phone buzz at midnight and he'd quickly turn it face down. I never checked. Maybe because I was scared of what I might find. When our first child was born, things changed, at least for a while. He smiled more. He held my hand again. We felt like a family, like maybe we'd found our balance, but life doesn't always stay that kind. He began to drift again. The conversations became shorter, the distance longer. I'd talk about our son's school or the bills piling up, and he'd nod without really listening. One evening after dinner, I asked, "Are you happy?" He looked at me as if the question confused him. "Of course," he said, but his eyes, they told me a different story. Years passed like that, me pretending, him avoiding. Our son grew up watching us live together, but not really be together, and yet I stayed. I stayed because that's what mothers do. I stayed because every time I thought of leaving, I'd see my child's face and tell myself, one day things will get better. But that day never came. Instead, I learned how to live in quiet misery. I learned how to smile at family gatherings, how to laugh when someone joked about the perfect couple, and how to hide tears under the sound of running water in the kitchen sink. There were days when I'd go to the market, see other couples holding hands, and wonder what that felt like after years of marriage, to still feel wanted, to still feel loved. One afternoon, I was folding his clothes when I found something that shook me more than I'd like to admit. It was a letter, a small piece of paper tucked in his shirt pocket. It wasn't from me. It said, "Thank you for today. I wish we had more time like this." No name, no signature, just a sentence heavy enough to crush the illusion I had built for 20 years. My hands trembled. My mind tried to convince me it meant nothing. Maybe it was from a coworker. Maybe it was just a note. But deep inside I knew it wasn't just a note. It was a crack in the wall that had been standing between us for years, and now it was starting to crumble. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our entire marriage in my mind. Every fight, every silence, every smile that felt rehearsed. I realized I didn't really know him anymore. Maybe I never did. The next morning, I confronted him. My voice was shaking, but I still asked, "Who is she?" He didn't answer at first. He just looked at me, tired and cornered. Then he said quietly, "You wouldn't understand." And something inside me broke. Not because he cheated, though that hurt, too, but because of those 3 words. You wouldn't understand. He didn't even try to make me understand. After that day, we stopped pretending. We lived like 2 strangers sharing the same roof. He ate alone. I ate alone. The silence grew thicker, filling every corner of the house. Even our son started to notice. "Why don't you 2 talk anymore?" he asked one night. I smiled weakly and said, "We're just tired." But what I really meant was, we were tired of trying to love each other. Months passed, and the letter remained hidden in my drawer. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, maybe because it had become proof that I wasn't imagining things. Proof that I wasn't crazy for feeling unloved. Every time I looked at it, I felt 2 things at once: anger and sadness. Anger at him for betraying me. Sadness for myself, for the woman who had spent half her life waiting for a man who stopped showing up long ago. Sometimes, I'd stand by the window at night, watching the lights in other houses, wondering if their stories were like mine. Do other women feel this alone in their own homes? Do they also cry quietly so their children don't hear? And slowly, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't anger anymore. It was realization. I realized I didn't hate him. I pitied him, because somewhere along the way, he lost the ability to love, and I lost myself trying to love him. Then, one day, our son came to me. He was older now, old enough to notice the cracks we tried to hide. "Mom," he said, "why don't you leave if it hurts so much?" I didn't know how to answer. For 20 years I had told myself I was staying for him, but hearing those words from his mouth, it made me question everything. Was I really protecting him? Or was I just too scared to start over? That night, I sat alone in the dark, thinking about all the years that had slipped away. All the birthdays, anniversaries, and moments that should have meant something but didn't. And for the first time in my life, I whispered to myself, "I want out." The thought terrified me. Divorce was a word that had never crossed my lips before. In our culture, it wasn't just a decision, it was a scandal, a storm that could destroy your reputation overnight. But what about my peace? What about the years I had lost waiting for something that never came back? I had given him everything, my time, my loyalty, my youth, and in return, I got silence. Maybe that's what hurts the most. Not the betrayal, not the lies, but the years I can never get back. That night, I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. There were wrinkles, yes. But behind them, there was something new. Strength. It scared me, but it also felt right. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't thinking about what people would say. I was thinking about what I needed, and I needed peace. The day I decided to leave wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no shouting, no broken dishes, no slammed doors. It was quiet, eerily quiet. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea that had already gone cold. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Every second felt like it was pushing me closer to a truth I'd been avoiding for too long. For years, I told myself I was staying for my family, for my son, for appearances. But deep down, I knew I had been staying because I was afraid. Afraid of the unknown. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of starting over when half of my life had already been spent. That morning, something inside me changed. I realized that fear had already taken too much from me. It had taken my youth, my joy, and my sense of self. If I didn't act now, it would take the rest of me too. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "I'm done pretending." It wasn't easy. The moment I decided to talk to him about divorce, my heart felt like it was being torn apart. He was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. I stood in front of him for a few seconds before speaking. "I want to talk," I said softly. He didn't even look up at first. "About what?" "About us," I replied. That made him pause. He put his phone aside and looked at me. "What about us?" I swallowed hard. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. He stared at me for a long time. Then without emotion, he said, "You're overreacting." Overreacting. That's what 20 years of pain meant to him, an overreaction. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "Not this time. No," I said. "I'm not overreacting. I'm finally reacting." He didn't argue much after that. Maybe he didn't care enough to fight for me. Or maybe part of him was relieved too. For days, we barely spoke. I started sleeping in the guest room. The silence that once hurt me now felt liberating. But the hardest part wasn't him. It was everyone else. When I told my family, their reactions cut deeper than any words he could have said. My mother gasped. "Divorce? After 20 years? What will people say?" My brother frowned. "You're being emotional. Every marriage has problems." And my aunt, ever the traditional one, said, "A woman should endure. That's what keeps a home together." Endure. Such a heavy word. For years, I had endured loneliness, betrayal, silence, and now that I wanted peace, they called me selfish. The whispers started soon after. Neighbors would look at me differently. Women would lower their voices when I passed by. I could almost hear their thoughts. She couldn't keep her husband. It hurt. Not because I cared about their judgment, but because I realized how cruel the world could be to a woman who chose herself. But there were moments, small, quiet moments, that reminded me why I made the right choice. One night, as I was folding laundry, my son came into the room. He didn't say much, just sat beside me. After a few minutes, he whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom." Those words, they shattered me and healed me at the same time. He didn't see a woman who gave up. He saw a woman who finally stood up for herself. The days that followed were strange. There was peace, but also pain, freedom, but also emptiness. I'd wake up and realize there was no one on the other side of the bed, no footsteps in the hall, no sound of his keys or his phone calls. It was quiet. Too quiet sometimes, but it was my quiet, and that made all the difference. I began rediscovering little things about myself, things I had buried over the years. I started reading again. I joined a local women's club, met others who had stories like mine. I even started painting, something I hadn't done since college. Every brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of the woman I used to be before marriage turned me into someone else's shadow. Still, healing wasn't linear. Some nights, I'd find myself staring at old photos, birthdays, trips, anniversaries, and wondering if it was all a lie. Did he ever love me? Did I ever make him happy? But then I'd remind myself, love that demands silence, pain, and endurance isn't love. It's captivity. I had been caged for 2 decades in the name of marriage. And now, even though I was scared, at least I was free. There were moments when he tried to talk again. Not to reconcile, but to question, was it really that bad? He asked one afternoon when he came to drop off some documents. I looked at him, at the man I had once believed was my forever, and said, "Yes, it was." He nodded, maybe realizing for the first time that I wasn't the same woman anymore. He left quietly, and I didn't cry. That's when I knew I was truly healing. Months turned into a year. I got used to my solitude. It wasn't loneliness, it was peace. I started working part-time at a school surrounded by children's laughter and innocent energy. For the first time in years, I felt useful. I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's mother. I was me. One afternoon, a colleague asked me, "Don't you miss him?" I thought about it for a moment and smiled softly. "I miss the idea of him," I said, "not the man he became." The hardest part, though, was learning to forgive, not him, but myself. Forgiving myself for staying too long, for accepting less than I deserved, for believing that endurance was love. But with every sunrise, I felt a little lighter. I learned that divorce isn't a failure. It's an act of courage. It's saying, I choose peace, even if it means walking alone. One day, I stood in front of the mirror again. The same mirror that had once reflected a broken woman now showed someone different, someone stronger, someone who had faced judgment, heartbreak and fear, and survived. I traced the wrinkles on my face and smiled. They weren't signs of aging. They were proof of endurance, of love, of loss, and of rebirth. That night, I sat by the window, the same one I used to stare out of, wondering about other people's lives. Now, I wasn't wondering anymore because I finally had a life of my own. The stars outside looked brighter than before. Maybe they had always been this bright. Maybe I just never noticed. I took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm free." And for the first time in 20 years, I truly meant it. Starting over at 42 isn't glamorous. It's not like the movies where the woman walks out of a toxic marriage, cuts her hair short, and suddenly her life is perfect. No, it's messy. It's exhausting. And sometimes, it's terrifying. I remember the first morning after moving into my small rented apartment. There were still unopened boxes scattered everywhere, and the air smelled of fresh paint and loneliness. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the sunlight creeping through half-closed blinds, and realized I didn't know what to do next. For 20 years, my life had been about routines that revolved around someone else, his breakfast, his laundry, his appointments, his moods. Now there was silence and freedom, but no direction. I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, and stood by the window. It was a simple act, but it felt strange doing it for no one but me. I didn't have to rush. I didn't have to please anyone. For the first time, I could just exist. I expected to cry. I didn't. I just sat there staring at it, feeling a quiet sense of closure. The woman I used to be, the one who cried alone at night, who tried to fix what couldn't be fixed. She was gone, and I didn't mourn her loss. I honored her strength. That morning, I decided to do something symbolic, something that would mark the beginning of my new life. I walked into my closet and pulled out an old wooden box from the top shelf. It was filled with memories, letters, photos, small keepsakes from our life together. I hadn't opened it since the day I moved out. I placed the box on the floor, sat cross-legged beside it, and began sorting through the memories. Our wedding photo, his hand around my waist, both of us smiling at something long forgotten, a movie ticket from our first date, the bracelet he gave me on our 5th anniversary. Each item carried a story, but the feelings attached to them were gone. It was strange. Once, these things had power over me. Now, they were just things. I kept one photo, our family picture with the kids when they were small, not for him, but for them. The rest I put back in the box, closed it, and walked to the park near my apartment. There, under a quiet tree, I buried it, not out of hatred, but out of peace. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about releasing what no longer needed to be carried. As I walked back home, I felt lighter. It was like shedding invisible weight I had been dragging for years. When I reached my apartment, I noticed something on the table, a small vase with fresh lilies. A friend from the school must have dropped them off earlier. They were my favorite flowers. Funny how little acts of kindness feel enormous when your heart has been starved for affection. I smiled, touched the petals gently, and whispered, "Thank you." Life had become simple, and that simplicity was healing. I worked at the school, spent weekends reading, cooked meals just for myself, and occasionally visited my grown-up children. They were both supportive now, proud even. At first, they struggled to understand why I left their father, but over time, they saw the change in me, the calmness, the quiet joy, and realized I had made the right choice. One evening, while having dinner with my daughter, she said softly, "You seem happier, Mom." "Different, but peaceful." I smiled and replied, "Peace looks different on everyone, sweetheart. This is what it looks like on me." Months passed. I continued writing online, sharing my journey without names or drama, just feelings. People began to connect deeply with my words. One comment stood out. "Your story gave me the courage to leave an unhappy marriage. Thank you for reminding me that I matter." I sat there staring at that comment, tears in my eyes. For years I believed my voice didn't matter. Now, that same voice was giving hope to others. It made me realize something beautiful: pain, when shared honestly, can become someone else's healing. One Sunday morning, I decided to visit the beach after many years. It was the same beach we used to visit as a family, but this time I went alone. The air was crisp, the sea was calm, and the sky had that soft golden hue before sunset. I took off my sandals and walked barefoot along the shore, feeling the cool water touch my feet. Each wave that came and went felt like life itself, unpredictable, yet constant. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The sound of the ocean drowned every lingering thought of regret. In that moment, I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about erasing the past. It's about freeing yourself from it. Later that evening, I sat by the water and wrote in my journal one last time. I once thought love was about staying no matter how much it hurt. But now I know love is also about leaving when staying breaks you. I gave 20 years of my life to a story that no longer served me. And today, I give myself permission to start a new one. I closed the journal, smiled, and let the sea breeze dry the tears on my face. They weren't sad tears anymore. They were the kind that come when you finally make peace with your past. As night fell, the stars began to appear, soft, scattered, endless. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you, God, for giving me the courage to walk away and the strength to begin again." The old me would have been afraid of being alone, but now, solitude felt like serenity. Silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of peace. I walked back to my car, the sound of waves following me like a soft lullaby. Before getting in, I looked back at the ocean one last time. 20 years of love, pain, duty, and silence, all washed away in the tide. And as I drove home, I realized something profound. The ending of one story is not the loss of everything. It's simply the beginning of another. When I reached home, I turned on the lights and stood in front of the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken anymore. Her eyes weren't filled with sorrow. They glowed with quiet strength. I smiled at her and said softly, "You made it." Then I sat down, opened my laptop, and began writing again. This time, not as a woman who was hurt, but as one who had healed. That night, before sleeping, I whispered my final prayer. May my children never settle for less than respect. May they learn that love is not about endurance, but peace. I turned off the lights and lay down, the cool breeze brushing against my face. I thought about the past, about who I was, who I had become, and who I was yet to be. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel trapped by memories. I felt grateful for them. Because even though the marriage ended, it taught me how strong I could be, and that strength, that quiet, unshakable peace was mine to keep. The story doesn't end with fireworks or grand gestures. It ends with a whisper, a breath, and a heart that finally found its rhythm again. I didn't fall in love again. I didn't rebuild a fairy tale. I simply learned how to live for me, and that, I realized, was more than enough. The first few weeks were filled with both peace and confusion. Some days, I'd feel light as air, like I had escaped a prison. Other days, I'd cry for hours, missing the familiarity of what once was. There's something haunting about long-term relationships. You don't just miss the person. You miss the version of yourself that existed beside them. Even if it hurt, it was still a part of your identity. One evening, while unpacking, I found an old photo album, our wedding pictures, vacations, family gatherings, smiling faces that now felt like strangers. I traced my fingers over one photo, me in my wedding dress. Eyes full of hope, I whispered to that woman, "You deserved better. But I'm glad you survived." I closed the album and put it away, not in anger, but in acceptance. The past no longer needed to take up space in my future. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I applied for a job at a nearby school as a teaching assistant. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose. Every morning, the sound of children laughing filled the halls, and something about that innocence healed me in ways therapy never could. One day, after class, a little girl hugged me and said, "You smile like my mom when she's happy." I don't know why, but those words broke me because I couldn't remember the last time someone had seen me as happy. That tiny compliment stayed with me for days. Maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I was just rediscovering joy, one fragile smile at a time. I also began doing small things I had once loved but abandoned years ago. I painted again, nothing perfect, just messy strokes of color that expressed the chaos inside me. I cooked for myself, not for someone's expectations. I even planted flowers on my small balcony. Every morning I'd water them and think, if these little plants can grow after being uprooted, so can I. But with healing came flashbacks, sharp and unexpected. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, hearing echoes of old arguments in my head. Sometimes I'd feel guilty for feeling happy. That's the cruel thing about emotional recovery. It's never a straight line. Some days you bloom, some days you break. I remember calling my friend Syra one evening and confessing, I thought leaving him would make everything better. But I still feel lost. She said something I'll never forget. Leaving doesn't heal you. Living does. Those words hit deep. I realized I had left my past behind, but I hadn't yet learned how to live in my present. So I started setting small goals every day. I'd write one thing I was grateful for. Some days it was as simple as, I made good tea today. Other days it was, I didn't cry this morning. It sounds small, but those moments built a foundation for something new, self-worth. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. Then came the day I bumped into him again. It was at a grocery store, of all places. I was standing in the aisle comparing prices for coffee when I heard that familiar voice behind me. Still drinking the same brand, huh? My stomach tightened. I turned around, and there he was, Damien, the man I had once built my world around. He looked the same, maybe a bit older, but the same cold expression. I forced a polite smile. Old habits die hard. We talked briefly, small talk that felt heavy. He asked if I was doing well. I said yes. He nodded, said he was glad, and walked away. I stood there for a long moment after he left, realizing something profound. My heart didn't race anymore. There was no ache, no anger, no longing, just peace. That's when I knew I had truly moved on. Weeks turned into months. I started attending counseling sessions at a community center for divorced women. Listening to other women's stories made me realize I wasn't alone. There were so many like me, women who had given their all and ended up empty. Together, we shared tears, laughter, and strength. I even made a new friend, Aisha, who told me divorce doesn't define us. What we do after it does. Her words became my quiet motivation. Eventually, I began writing about my experiences, just small journal entries at first. But one day, I decided to post one online under a pseudonym. The response shocked me. Women from all over the world commented, "Your story is my story." I thought I was alone until I read this. That's when it hit me. My pain had purpose. Maybe sharing it could help others find courage too. I started writing regularly, and people began following my posts. Some sent me messages thanking me for giving them strength to leave toxic marriages. For the first time in decades, I felt seen, not as someone's wife or mother, but as myself. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, my son called. His voice was calm but thoughtful. "Mom," he said, "I've never seen you this peaceful before. I'm really proud of you." I smiled, tears filling my eyes. "Peace comes slowly," I told him. "But when it does, it feels like coming home." Later that night, I wrote in my journal, "I used to think love was about sacrifice. Now I know it's about freedom, respect, and peace. And sometimes the greatest love story is learning to love yourself again." The next morning, I looked around my small apartment, the plants, the books, the art on the walls, and realized something. This space wasn't just a place to live. It was a reflection of me, simple, warm, and healing. I had built it piece by piece, just like I was rebuilding my soul. No one could take it from me this time. No anger, no betrayal, no fear. I was finally standing on my own, not as someone's wife, but as a woman who had survived heartbreak and turned it into strength. That night, before going to bed, I whispered to myself, I may have lost a marriage, but I found myself, and that, I realized, was the most beautiful ending I could have ever hoped for. The day I decided to let go completely wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no tears, no goodbyes, no heavy words. It was quiet, like the soft closing of a book whose story had finally ended. It started like any other morning. The sunlight slipped through the curtains, spreading a golden warmth across my small apartment. I made my usual cup of coffee and sat by the window, The world outside was moving, people walking to work, children laughing on their way to school, cars rushing by. But inside, for the first time in years, my heart felt still. I realized that peace doesn't come when life gets easier. It comes when you stop fighting what already happened. A few days earlier, I had received an envelope from the court. Inside was the official divorce decree. Just a few lines of text. Simple, emotionless, final. It felt strange holding a piece of paper that symbolized the end of 2 decades.